Turn, please, if you would, to Luke chapter 22. We're going to begin in verse 34. You recall the scene that Jesus has observed Passover with them, and he's instituted the Lord's Supper. And now something completely out of place happens. You know, there's a website called shipoffools.com. It's actually a British website. It has to do with religious matters. And when the British government acted as though they were going to pass a law making jokes about religion illegal, because they said, they could be offensive. Ship of Fools reacted to this and said, well, that's crazy. That's, of course, against free speech. And so they actually had a poll. What's the funniest religious joke that you've ever heard? And the winner was a joke that I heard a long time ago, and it was written by a comedian named Emo Phillips. I wonder, any of you ever see Emo Phillips? I love Emo Phillips. He's the goofiest, craziest comic around. But Emo Phillips told this story. He said he was walking up on a bridge one day, and he saw a guy that was about to jump off the bridge and end his life. And he said, "Oh, please don't. Why are you doing that?" And the guy said, "Nobody loves me." And Emo said, "God loves you." He said, are you a religious person? The guy says, "Yeah, I believe in God." He said, "Well, are you Jewish or Christian?" He said, "Well, I'm Christian." He said, well, are you Catholic or Protestant?" He said, I'm Protestant." Emo said, "Me too." "Well, what franchise?" The guy said, "Well, I'm Baptist." Emo said, "Me too." "Well, are you Southern Baptist or Northern Baptist?" The man said, "I'm Northern Baptist." Emo said, "Me too." He said, "Well, are you Northern Baptist Great Lakes region or are you Northern Baptist Eastern region?" He said, "I'm Northern Baptist Great Lakes region." Emo said, "Me too." "Are you Northern Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1857 or are you Northern Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912? The guy said, "I'm Northern Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. He said, "Die, heretic," and pushed him off the bridge. Now, the reason I think we laugh at that, we all find it funny, is because there's something that rings true about that, isn't there? What happens when you get a bunch of Baptists together is they start asking, "What do you believe? What do you believe?" until they find the thing that they disagree on, and then they realize, I can't be with that guy. I mean, his eschatology is off. Oh, he's not a Calvinist, or he is a Calvinist, or he's this or that. What is it about us that wants to just find the thing that divides us, and that becomes the picture? It's not really unique. Here's Jesus. He has just observed the last Passover, the last supper, the first Lord's Supper, as he's instituted this with his church. He's talked about his death, his body that's going to be broken, his blood that's going to be shed. And look in verse 24 exactly what happens at that moment. A dispute arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as greatest. Wow. This is how you know the first church was a Baptist church. They have the Lord's Supper, and immediately there's a dispute. Well, you don't get more Baptist than that. A dispute arose, and he said to them, "Look, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves." For who's the greater? One who reclines at table or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at table? But I'm among you as the one who serves. You are those who have stayed with me in my trials, and I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me. You know, I think if you boil it down, you look what's going on in this scene, it's sort of easy to understand why they begin to compare themselves to each other. Remember, I told you that when they go into this upper room, it was furnished, that word was used, and they were sitting at a triclinium, and all the seats were arranged where everybody was to sit. Now, I know you may not like this, but there are people who don't like being told where to sit. That's just throwing that out there. It happens. But, you know, in a Jewish first century observance of the Passover, everybody's seat was determined. In fact, that was true at all banquets because you had the host seated at a certain place, and to his right usually was the guest of honor. Now remember, at the Passover, you put the youngest to the right of the host because the youngest is supposed to ask the questions, why is this night different from all other nights? And we know from the Gospel of John that John, the beloved disciple, is right there at the right of Jesus. And Peter's close to him because John and Peter can look at each other and send signals. And Peter tells John to ask Jesus who it is that's going to betray him. And Judas is close to Jesus because Jesus says that the one who dips his bread with me will be the one that betrays me. But some of those disciples, they're way down the pecking order. Remember, Jesus has advised the disciples, when you go into a banquet, always sit at the farthest seat, take the seat that is the least honorable, and then if they move you up, great. But if you sit in the seat near the host, in the seat of honor, and they ask you to move down, well, that's humiliating, that's embarrassing. You don't want that. But when you think about all that custom of the first century, and you are seated in proximity to the host based on who you are, then that means that every single banquet, there's clearly a pecking order there, and people start to compare themselves as to where they fit. Now here's Jesus talking about his death and what's going to happen to him, and they're looking at where they sit, and they're comparing themselves. And so when it says that there came this dispute about who was the greatest, it probably involves the place where they were sitting. Why is he seated there and I'm way down here? I'm greater than that guy. I do this. I have this skill. I've done this for Jesus. Jesus is closer to me than to him. Why should he sit there and me all the way down here? And they begin to have these comparisons. Now, listen, comparisons are incompatible with grace. The minute you start looking at other people and what they have that you don't have and how God has favored them in ways that he hasn't favored you, this just totally undermines the grace that you've received. Remember the parable of the banquet that Jesus told when the people who were invited would not come, and he told, well, then you go out into the city and you find the lame, the blind, the crippled, the deaf. You bring them in so my house may be full. And remember, when those people are invited, they're not expecting to be invited. And when a blind, lame guy comes into a banquet he never expected to be invited to, the last thing that's on his mind is where he gets to sit. He's just so grateful to be there. And that is the spirit of one who's been redeemed by the blood of Christ. I don't deserve to be here at all. And the minute you start comparing yourself, this undermines any comprehension of grace. You're making it about what you think you deserve instead of God's marvelous grace giving you something that you in no way deserved. See, comparisons inherently lead to disputes. The minute I start comparing my preaching to someone else's preaching, or my church to someone else's church, or my teaching to someone else's teaching, I'm going to start looking for the things that convince me that I'm better than he is, or I deserve something better than he does. And that's the word used here, verse 24, a dispute. And by the way, this word in Greek has two parts. It's philoneikia, and the first part of that philo means to love. It's like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. This is philoneikia. This is a love of argument. This is a disposition to argue. There was an opportunity, a disposition, a love of argument that arose among them. And these guys, they were looking for something to argue about. They were looking for something to compare. But comparisons always lead to dissatisfaction. Because the minute you start comparing, rare is the individual who says, man, I don't know why I have any of the blessings of God. I don't deserve any of this. And man, people who've got more than I do, good on them. I'm so happy they've got more than I do. I rejoice in what God has given them because, man, I don't deserve anything. That's a rare quality, isn't it? Comparisons usually lead to dissatisfaction. When I see where the other guy got seated, I'm like, why am I way down here? This is one of the things about Facebook, isn't it? People put their best moments and their best accomplishments on Facebook. Few people put on Facebook, oh man, my wife and I just aren't getting along these days. I just sometimes can't stand to be in the room with her. And by the way, and if you do, that's even more pathetic, right? I mean, but what we see on Facebook are people's best and their happy moments, and sometimes we put a filter on there to give ourselves a glow and to take out the wrinkles and to look better than we really are. And what are we trying to do? I got to look as good as somebody else, and man, we got to look as happy as other people. And we're trying to show the great aspects of our lives, and we start comparing. I mean, this is proven fact that one of the greatest sources of discontentment in modern culture is Facebook, Instagram. These things people look at it and they go, man, I'm not having a great life like this person. I don't have a body like that person. I don't get to I don't travel places like that person. And boy, it leads to dissatisfaction. And ultimately, comparisons lead to distrust. And the distrust is not just of the person you're comparing yourself to. At the heart of it all is you don't trust God. You think God has somehow done you wrong. You think God has withheld something good from you that you deserve. Why does that guy deserve that? Why does she get to go there? And if someone thinks differently than I do, they have different strengths than I do, I don't trust them. Calvinism, eschatology, who you vote for, how you feel about certain current events. We often come closer to saying, die heretic, and pushing them off the bridge than we do saying, peace be upon you, brother. I love you in the Lord. See, Jesus says no. Here's Jesus hearing this, and Jesus said, look, the kings of the Gentiles do this. This is the way the Gentiles work. Unbelievers do this. They have certain authority structures, and to them the goal is to be the king that's in authority and lord it over everybody else. I mean, man, when you get to be a ruler, when you have the favor of Rome, that's when life is good. That's the way the Gentiles live. But he said, but not so with you, verse 26. Not so with you. Let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves. See, Jesus is saying true greatness is not like the world defines greatness at all. The world defines greatness by money, by power, by prestige, by possessions, by popularity. That's the way the world does it. But Jesus said, when you measure greatness the way by the world's measure, then you've bought into the world system. If that's how you view life, then you are more like the Gentiles than you are like the people of God. No, he said, true greatness is found in humility, Let the one who wants to be great be like the youngest. Now, frankly, this admonition of Jesus doesn't resonate in our contemporary culture quite like it did when Jesus said it, not quite like it did when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, I remember we had family get-togethers. Did the kids eat first? The children did not eat first. We had to eat after the adults ate, and we ate at a kids' table and in a separate room. And I remember even at home, my mother, when she would fry a chicken, I don't think I ever got a chicken breast till I was 12 years old. There was no question about who got the breast, and it wasn't the kids, and especially wasn't the youngest. And, I got a leg maybe, the back. I had never liked the back. That's what I got. I got the back of the chicken more than anything else because, mom and dad got the breast. My sisters got the legs or other stuff, the wings. I got what was left because I was the youngest. And this is the way it worked. And here's what Jesus is saying. You want to be the greatest, then you do that. You be willing to take the leftovers. You be willing to sit at the children's table. Children are to be what? Seen and not heard. You don't hear that much anymore. But this is what Jesus is saying. You learn to sit there quietly and listen. True greatness is found in humility, ultimately in serving. Here Jesus leads them down a path where he shows them the wrongness of their thinking and how their thinking is incompatible with the way he lives. He says, all right, now who's greatest? The one you think of as the greatest, is it the guy who sits down at the table and reclines and while someone serves him? Or is it the one who serves? It's the guy who's getting served that's the greatest in any social setting, isn't it? Jesus even asked the question in a way that anticipates their positive response. It's the guy that gets served that's the greatest, right? Isn't it? Yes. Then here comes the bomb. Yet, I'm among you as one who serves. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to them. Jesus has been pointing them this way all along, all the way back in Luke chapter 12. You remember when Jesus was talking about the coming of the Son of Man. And really, I think in that point, initially he's talking about the coming of the Messiah, what you and I would call his first coming. And he said in Luke 12:37, blessed are those servants who the master finds awake when he comes. Now listen to this. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them, the servants, recline at table, and he will come and serve them. Now that should have caught their attention right then in Luke 12. Wait, what? When a master comes from a trip, finds his servants, he says, hey, fix me some supper, wait on me, wash my feet, clean my shoes. Jesus said, no. When the master comes and he finds those servants awake, watching for him, you know what he's going to do? He's going to gird himself and he's going to serve them. And of course, Jesus is saying that's how he comes. He comes in his first coming completely as a servant. He comes to serve those who are watching for him. Remember, but then again in Luke 17, he tells the parable of the unprofitable servants. He says, will any of you who has a servant, and the key there is will any of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him when he has come in from the field, oh, come at once and recline at table? Will he not rather say to him, prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you may eat and drink? Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? See, in Luke 12, Jesus is showing us how he comes as a servant. In Luke 17, he's saying, now which of you would do this? Here's what you would do. You'd come in, and after your servant has worked all day, then you make him fix you supper and wait on you. You make it about you. But that's not how Jesus does it. Now Jesus makes clear which one of these two models he is. He serves. Now, I don't want you to miss this. Jesus is the creator of the universe. And yet he came as a servant. If Jesus, the Son of God, serves, how much more should we? And this is what Jesus is pointing them to. You want to be great? Oh, true greatness is found through serving. Now, he does commend them at one point. He says in verse 28, you are those who have stayed with me in my trials. Now, there's one mark of true greatness that 11 of the 12 did exhibit, that they stayed loyal through trials. They stuck with Jesus. You know, true greatness is certainly not found in deserting people in their hour of need, but in sticking with them. And Jesus did that. But look, Jesus also tells them that because of that, that kind of true greatness is rewarded by God. Listen to what he says. Now look, just as my Father has assigned to me a kingdom. Now that word translated in the ESV, assigned, is the verb form of the noun covenant. Like we talk about the new covenant, the old covenant, the New Testament, the Old Testament. This is the verb that he says, just as the Father has covenanted to me a kingdom, in the same way, I'm covenanting to you my kingdom. And you are going to sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. You are going to eat and drink at my banquet. Now, here's what Jesus is saying. First of all, let's notice the eschatology of this, that God is going to reconstitute Israel. There's a new Israel. And the 12 apostles sitting on 12 thrones are going to be, in essence, typical of this new Israel. They're going to lead and judge this reconstituted Israel. They're going to eat and drink at his table in the kingdom. They're going to sit on thrones in the kingdom. This is the reward God has promised them. Now, if they're going to rule and reign with Christ forever, why would they fuss over where they sit at this table? Because this table's not what matters. Look at the reward coming to them. Look at what God is covenanting to them through Jesus Christ. And you want to fuss about this? Oh, folks, if we could really get a vision of what God has promised for us in eternity, it would erase our little feuds and disputes and fusses and comparisons here on earth. If you're going to rule and reign with Christ, why are you so bothered that somebody has a bigger house than you or gets to go on a trip you may not get to go on? You're going to rule the nations. You're going to judge the angels, Paul says in 1 Corinthians. And you're worried about someone else's Instagram account being better than yours? Oh, that we could get a vision of what Jesus has covenanted to us. No, true greatness is personified by Jesus. This is what Jesus says, yet I am among you as one who serves. You want to be like the Gentiles? You want to measure greatness in what you have and achieve and who waits on you? Have at it, but that's not the value of God. God measures greatness in whom you serve. God demonstrates greatness through the person and the work of Jesus. Now Jesus looks at these disciples. He gets real personal. He looks at Simon Peter and he says, Simon, Satan has has demanded, that's a good translation the ESV gives it. Satan has demanded y'all. Now, I'm going to point out here that the first uses of the word you in this verse are plural. Simon, Simon, Satan has demanded y'all, you plural, that he might have y'all, all of you, you plural, to sift y'all as wheat. All those are plural. Now Jesus makes it singular. But I have prayed for you. That your faith, you singular, that your faith won't fail. And when you've turned again, strengthen your brothers. Now, why does Jesus bring in Satan at this point? Satan has entered into Judas, right? And Judas has gone out to betray Jesus. But now he looks at Peter, and he lets us in on this cosmic struggle that Satan wants to have all of the disciples. He wants to sift them as wheat. He wants to put him through his thresher and grind them up. Jesus says, but I've prayed concerning you. Why does Satan come in at this moment in Jesus' thinking? Because comparisons always give opportunity to Satan. When you start comparing yourself with others and trying to figure out who's the greatest, Satan, who is the adversary, he is the accuser, he is the tempter. Satan is always looking for resentful or proud hearts. If he can find a heart that is resentful, that God has done for others what he has not done for me, if he can find a heart that is proud because look what God has done for me, someone that has forgotten that everything they have is a gift, when he can find a resentful heart, a bitter heart, or a proud and haughty heart, either one, man, he moves in. Jesus says Satan desires, Satan demands all of y'all. But I have prayed for you, Peter. I want to point out a theological point here. Notice that Satan demands things. Now, we know from the book of Job. Remember Job, in the book of Job, Satan goes into the presence of God and he says, let me at him. He only worships you because of all the stuff he's got. Let me touch his stuff. Let me take his children. Let me take his health. Notice at every juncture, Satan has a desire. He makes a demand, so to speak, but he can only do what God allows. And God only allows that which, first of all, his child can handle by his grace, and secondly, what will ultimately bring that child closer to him. Everything that happens in Job never knows about that exchange between God and Satan. But what it teaches us is that the devil is always God's devil. By that I mean he's a mad dog, but he's a dog on a leash. He can go no further than God allows him to go. He can do no more than what God in his sovereign plan allows. And God is so great and so sovereign that he even uses the raving of this mad dog on a leash to still accomplish his purpose. What is his purpose for Peter? His purpose for Peter is to get him ready to preach on the day of Pentecost, and 3,000 people are going to turn to him. His purpose for Peter is that he's going to use him greatly in the book of Acts. Jesus knows what's coming, and he knows he has to get Peter there. Satan wants to have Peter and the other disciples to sift them as wheat. And Jesus says, okay, I'm going to let you have him to this extent, but no further. And he says to Peter, and when you have turned again, What's another good word for that? Repented. When you've repented, after Satan puts you through what he's going to put you through, you'll turn, strengthen your brothers. See, Satan's greatest strategy, though, is to make us self-reliant, to think we can handle it, that we can handle his onslaught. What does Peter say? When Jesus says this very pointed instruction to him, what's Peter's response? He says, "Oh, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death." Really? Are you? Are you, Peter? Peter thinks he can handle it. And he has no idea how weak he is, how desperately he needs the Lord. Peter, feeling self-reliant, is now set up for great failure. But Jesus is urging Peter, as he's urging us, to seek him alone. You can't handle it. Look, Satan has desired to have y'all, to sift y'all as wheat. Do you think Satan might use things like COVID-19 to hurt the Lord's church? You think he might use things like racial division to hurt the Lord's church? Do you think he might use things like government requirements? I mean, don't you think Satan is always looking for bitter or proud hearts that he can take advantage of? And yet, whether there's a global pandemic or whether you're on vacation in the Bahamas, you still need to understand you can't do it alone. Jesus didn't say, without me you can't do hard things. He said, without me you can do nothing. Seek him alone. He urges us to meekness. Be like the youngest. Understand that every other human being on the face of this planet knows stuff you don't know. You can learn from anybody. Don't let your degree or your money or your accomplishment, achievement, give you such a swelled head that you think you can't learn from others. Jesus teaches us to be meek and to rest in God's sovereignty. That even when Satan attacks, God is so great and so big and his grace so free that he can turn that satanic attack into an occasion of great victory. Isn't that what happens with the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 12 when he said, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh to keep me from being conceited, but he also called it a messenger of Satan to harass me. You need to understand that often the things that happen in your life are both attacks from Satan and also tests from God. Satan wanting to make you fail, God wanting to make you stronger. You don't need to sit around worrying about, is this from the devil or is this from God? The response should be the same. The response is seeking Christ alone. The response is meekness. The response is to rest in God's sovereignty and ultimately to have total dependence on him. I love the verbs Luke uses here that Satan demands, but Jesus asked. He says, I have asked concerning you. I've made a petition concerning you. Satan demands, I want to have them. But there is at the right hand of the Father an intercessor who is constantly pleading on my behalf. And he will not allow Satan to go beyond what his grace in me is sufficient to handle. And he is so great that he will ask the Father to even use Satan's attacks on me to draw me closer to him, to give me a greater sense of dependence that I might rest in his grace. In fact, Jesus does not pray for Peter to be spared. Did you notice that? He doesn't say, but hey, Peter, I have prayed that Satan can't touch you at all. That's not what he prayed. And when you've turned again, in other words, you're going to be going the wrong direction, Peter. You're going to mess up. But when you've turned back, humbled, a little humiliated, with a greater sense of your dependence on me, you'll be of more use to me then. When you've turned again, you strengthen your brothers. In other words, you make it about others. You serve others. You turn failure into ministry. Aren't you glad God's so great he can do that? He can take your failure and turn it into something useful. In fact, if he couldn't do that, he couldn't use any of us. He's only got sinners to work with. If he could only use people who've never messed up, well, he'd have nobody to use but Jesus. But he uses us, even with our failure and our mess ups. Peter now, he doesn't get it yet, does he? Now, Lord, I am ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. I'm your guy. You can count on me. Oh, Jesus says, no, you're going to deny me, Peter. The good news is I'm not going to deny you. It's funny to me that the minute Jesus suggests to Simon that he's going to fail, where does Simon Peter's mind go? Straight to the big ticket item. I'll go to prison and I'll die for you. Yeah, that's what we do, isn't it? I'm sure you've thought it before. What if our government ever outlawed Christianity? Oh, I would stand and defy the government, and I would be willing to stand in front of a firing squad. What if communist China ruled the world and took over? I mean, I've been in these countries where people are imprisoned. I know people who've spent years of their life in prison for nothing other than preaching the gospel. I've got former students of mine right now in prison for preaching the gospel in some of those countries. So I know what happens, and we all think about it. What if it happened here? I would defy the government. I would stand and preach the gospel. I would be willing to face the firing squad. Now, I'm just like you. I too wonder if I could have withstood persecution, prosecution, and torture alongside the likes of Polycarp or Huss or Tyndale or more contemporary martyrs of the faith. That's how we think, though. Boy, I could do the big stuff. I think Jesus is really asking us, do you love him enough to get up from the table and wrap a towel around yourself and serve others? Do you love him enough to turn off the computer and stop looking at pornography? Do you love him enough to stop having sex with your girlfriend? Or to stand alone in a culture that approves of homosexuality? And they say, no, I'm not going to wear that rainbow flag on my shirt. Do you love him enough to bill your customers honestly? Or to tithe? Or to submit? Isn't it remarkable that Peter, after denying Jesus and after living a few years and leading and learning, wrote the words that Pastor Chris read to us earlier? I want you to recall. I know that sort of sneaks up on you. He read those words. They're lovely words, good advice. But I want you to see that the guy that wrote those words that Chris read is the guy that stands here this day with pride and self-reliance saying, not me, Lord. I'll go to prison with you. I'll die with you. But years later, after he's gone through that, what does he write? Clothe yourselves with humility, because God gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you. Oh, the guy that was disputing about who gets to sit where, who's the greatest, now says, let him exalt you. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Satan has desired to have y'all. after you have suffered a while, he wrote, the God of all grace will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. Do you hear the connection between those words in 1 Peter 5 and what we read right here in Luke chapter 22? Ironically, turns out Peter was right. He did go to prison. And he did die for the cause of Christ. Jerome wrote that at Nero's hands, Peter received the crown of martyrdom, being nailed to the cross with his head towards the ground and his feet raised on high, asserting that he was unworthy to be crucified in the same manner as his Lord. To be real candid with you, here's the truth. God will probably never require you to die for him. I'd say there's a good chance that none of us will ever be asked to make that decision. Fred Craddock, the late Fred Craddock, preaching a sermon I heard one time. He talked about his call to ministry and how he wrestled through it. And when he finally surrendered, what he pictured was something entirely different than the way his life turned out. He said, I pictured myself standing in front of the military firing squad and being told, deny Jesus and live. I bravely told the story of Jesus, and the command was given, ready, aim, fire. Flags were flown at half-mast. Widows were crying. A monument was erected where I gave my life for Christ. Nobody told me that I couldn't give my life for Christ by writing one big check. Instead, it has been decades of writing little checks. 85 cents here, $1.39 there. Giving my life for Christ has meant being faithful in the small things over and over throughout my life. You probably won't get to write one big check. You'll probably never be asked to die for Jesus. But the question is not, will you die for him? The question is always, will you live for him?